My daughter-in-law slept with my husband while planning our divorce. I pretended to know nothing. At the lawyer's office, they handed me papers designed to steal everything I owned. I smiled and signed. What I did next left everyone speechless. I'm Catherine Brennan, and this is my story. Stay with me until the end, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far my truth has traveled. The afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains of my Connecticut dining room, casting soft patterns across the cream-colored tablecloth I'd used for family gatherings for 30 years. At 64, I still took pride in these small traditions. The good china arranged just so, fresh flowers from my garden as the centerpiece, cucumber sandwiches cut into perfect triangles. Rachel had called that morning, her voice tight with something I couldn't quite place. "Kate, can we talk? Just the two of us?" There was an urgency there that made my stomach clench, but I pushed the feeling aside. Rachel Clark was my daughter-in-law, Vanessa's older sister. While we'd always been cordial at family gatherings, we weren't particularly close. She was a nurse at Hartford General, practical and straightforward in a way that contrasted sharply with Vanessa's polished glamour. The fact that she wanted to meet alone was unusual enough to set off quiet alarm bells in my mind. I smoothed my hands over the tablecloth one more time, checking my reflection in the silver tea service. The woman looking back at me had aged well, I supposed. 64 years had left laugh lines around my eyes and silver threading through my auburn hair, but I'd maintained my figure and my posture. My grandmother used to say that a woman's bearing said everything about her character. "Stand tall, Catherine," she'd tell me. "Let the world see your backbone." The house felt too quiet lately. Richard, my husband of 42 years, had been distant for months, always working late, always finding excuses to disappear into his study with his laptop and his phone. And Daniel, our 37-year-old son, was so wrapped up in his marriage to Vanessa that his visits had become perfunctory at best. Quick Sunday dinners where he barely looked up from his phone, his attention always divided. The doorbell chimed, pulling me from my thoughts. I opened it to find Rachel standing on my front steps, clutching her purse like a shield. She looked pale, her usually perfect makeup slightly smudged around her eyes as if she'd been crying. Her nurse's scrubs were wrinkled, and her dark hair, normally pulled back in a neat ponytail, hung loose around her shoulders. "Kate, thank you for seeing me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course, dear. Come in, come in." I led her to the dining room, noting how her hands trembled slightly as she set down her purse. "I made your favorite cucumber sandwiches and that lemon cake you complimented last Easter." She managed a weak smile but didn't touch the food I'd so carefully arranged. Instead, she stared at her folded hands, her knuckles white with tension. "Rachel, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." She looked up then, and I saw something in her green eyes that made my blood run cold. Pain, guilt, and underneath it all, a desperate kind of courage. The look of someone about to destroy everything to tell the truth. "Kate, I need to tell you something, and I don't know how to say it without destroying everything." My heart began to pound, but I kept my voice steady. Years of playing the diplomat in family disputes, of smoothing over Richard's business stresses, of maintaining peace at all costs had taught me to keep my composure no matter what. "Whatever it is, we can work through it together." Rachel let out a shaky breath, tears pooling in her eyes. "It's about Vanessa and Richard." The world tilted slightly, but I forced myself to remain still, my hands folded calmly in my lap despite the sudden roaring in my ears. "What about them?" "They're having an affair." The words tumbled out in a rush, as if she'd been holding them back for so long they'd built up pressure. "I've known for 3 weeks. I saw them together at that little cafe downtown, Riverside Bistro, the one near Richard's office. They were holding hands, kissing, acting like lovers. I felt something inside me crack, like ice breaking on a frozen pond. The sound silent, but the fracture devastating. But my voice remained steady. My grandmother's training held firm. "Are you certain?" Rachel nodded miserably. "I confronted Vanessa about it. She didn't even try to deny it. She just laughed and said it wasn't any of my business." Her voice broke completely. "But Kate, the things she said about you—" "What things?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. "She said you were old and boring, that Richard deserved better. She said once the divorce was final, she'd make sure you got as little as possible." Rachel was crying openly now. "She's been planning this, Kate. The whole thing. She married Daniel to get close to the family, to the money. She's been working on Richard for months. The room spun around me, but I gripped the edge of the table and held on. 42 years of marriage. A son I'd raised with love and dedication. A daughter-in-law I'd welcomed with open arms, defended when Richard complained about her expensive tastes, comforted when she and Daniel had their small disagreements. All of it crumbling because of greed and betrayal. "Why are you telling me this?" I whispered. Rachel reached across the table and grasped my hand. "Because it's wrong. Because you've been nothing but kind to our family, and you don't deserve this. Because Daniel doesn't deserve to be married to someone who's capable of this level of deception." She paused, wiping her eyes with her free hand. "And because I love my nephew, and I can't stand watching Vanessa destroy everything good in this family." I stared at our joined hands, mine wrinkled and spotted with age, hers smooth and young. "Does Daniel know?" "No, and I don't know if I should tell him. It would destroy him." I pulled my hand free and stood up slowly, walking to the window that overlooked the garden Richard and I had planted together in our early years. The roses were in full bloom, their red petals bright against the green foliage. Everything looked so normal, so peaceful. But underneath, the roots were rotting. "What will you do?" Rachel asked behind me. I turned back to her, and something had shifted inside me. The initial shock was giving way to something cooler, more calculating. I'd spent my entire adult life taking care of others, smoothing over problems, keeping the peace. I'd swallowed my pride when Richard made thoughtless comments about my appearance. I'd bitten my tongue when he forgot our anniversary 3 years running. I'd played the perfect corporate wife, the devoted mother, the gracious hostess. But this wasn't something that could be smoothed over with a smile and a diplomatic word. "Nothing," I said calmly. Rachel's eyes widened. "Nothing? I'm going to pretend I never heard this conversation. I'm going to smile and play the devoted wife and mother, and I'm going to let them think they're winning." "But Kate—" "Rachel, dear," I interrupted, my voice gentle but firm. "Some games require patience, and I've been patient for a very long time. Sometimes the best strategy isn't to charge in with guns blazing. Sometimes you have to let your enemies think they've already won." I sat back down and poured myself a cup of tea with steady hands, the familiar ritual calming my racing thoughts. "Tell me, does Vanessa know you're here?" "No. She thinks I'm at work." "Good. It needs to stay that way." I met her eyes, and she must have seen something there that surprised her, because she sat back slightly. "Can you do that for me? Can you pretend you never told me?" Rachel nodded slowly. "But what about Daniel? What about your marriage?" I took a sip of tea, letting the warmth spread through me. "Some battles aren't won by charging in, dear. Sometimes you have to let your enemies think they've already won." After Rachel left, I sat alone in my dining room for a long time, staring at the untouched cake and sandwiches. The house felt different now, as if the very walls had shifted. Every family photo on the mantel, every shared memory attached to the furniture and decorations, all of it tainted by the knowledge of what was happening under my own roof. When Richard came home that evening, I was in the kitchen preparing his favorite dinner, pot roast with carrots and potatoes, the same meal I'd made every Thursday for 40 years. "Smells good," he said, not meeting my eyes as he loosened his tie. "Long day at the office?" I asked pleasantly, as if I didn't know he'd probably spent his lunch hour with my daughter-in-law. "The usual." He disappeared upstairs to change, and I continued setting the table, my movements automatic and precise. When he returned, we ate in relative silence, the conversation limited to mundane topics about the weather and household repairs. But I watched him carefully now, noting things I'd overlooked before. The way he checked his phone constantly, the screen lighting up with notifications he quickly dismissed. The new cologne he'd started wearing, something younger, more expensive than his usual scent. The fact that he no longer looked at me when he spoke, his eyes always sliding away as if I were already invisible to him. 42 years, and I was just now seeing my husband clearly. That night, as he lay beside me in our king-sized bed, I stared at the ceiling and made a decision. They wanted to play games? Fine, but they had no idea who they were playing against. Living with the knowledge of betrayal was like walking on broken glass. Every smile I forced, every pleasant conversation I maintained cut deeper into my soul. But I persisted, playing my role as the unsuspecting wife and mother, while carefully observing the elaborate deception unfolding in my own home. 48 hours after Rachel's revelation, I began my performance in earnest. It was a Saturday morning, and Richard was in his study, ostensibly working on a proposal for a new construction project. I knocked softly on the door, carrying a cup of his favorite coffee, dark roast with just a splash of cream. "Thought you might need this," I said, setting it on his desk. He looked up, startled, as if he'd forgotten I existed in this house. "Oh, thanks, Kate." I noticed his laptop screen angled away from me, but not before I caught a glimpse of a text message conversation. The name at the top made my stomach turn. V. "You're working so hard lately," I said, keeping my voice light. "I was thinking maybe we should take a trip. Remember how we used to talk about seeing Italy?" Richard's face went through a series of emotions: surprise, guilt, calculation. That's a nice thought, but I've got so much on my plate right now. Maybe next year?" "Of course," I smiled. "Next year." I retreated, closing the door softly behind me. In the hallway, I allowed myself a moment, just a moment, to lean against the wall and breathe. Then I straightened my spine and went downstairs to prepare lunch. The real test came on Sunday, when Daniel and Vanessa arrived for our weekly family dinner. I'd spent the morning cooking: roasted chicken with herbs from my garden, scalloped potatoes, green beans almondine, and an apple pie for dessert. The house smelled wonderful. The table was set with my best dishes, and I'd even put on one of my nicer dresses, a navy blue sheath that Richard used to say brought out my eyes. Vanessa swept in wearing a tight red dress that was more appropriate for a cocktail party than a family dinner. Her blonde hair was professionally styled, her makeup flawless, and she carried an expensive bottle of wine, a Bordeaux that probably cost $200. "Kate, you look wonderful," she gushed, embracing me with theatrical warmth. The scent of her perfume, Chanel No. 5, the same fragrance I detected on Richard's shirts lately, made me want to recoil. "I love what you've done with the flowers on the table." "Thank you, dear," I said, returning her hug with practiced ease. "Daniel should be here shortly. Would you like some wine while we wait?" "Actually," Vanessa said, holding up the bottle she'd brought, "I brought this for Richard. It's a 2015 Chateau Margaux, one of his favorites." I noticed she didn't bring anything for me. She never did. "How thoughtful," I said, taking the bottle. "He'll be so pleased." Richard appeared from his study, and I watched, really watched, the way they greeted each other. Vanessa's eyes lit up in a way they never did for Daniel. Richard's hand lingered just a second too long on her shoulder as he thanked her for the wine. Their eye contact was intense, intimate, loaded with meaning, and they thought they were being subtle. Daniel arrived 20 minutes later, apologizing for being delayed at a client meeting. My son looked tired, I realized with a pang. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his usually impeccable architect's attire, crisp shirt and tailored pants, looked rumpled. "Sorry, Mom," he said, kissing my cheek. "The Henderson project is driving me crazy." "No need to apologize, sweetheart. Dinner's ready whenever you are." We gathered around the dining room table, and I served the meal I'd spent hours preparing. The conversation flowed in predictable patterns. Daniel talked about his latest architectural project. Richard discussed a new development deal, and Vanessa performed. She touched Richard's hand when passing him the salt. She laughed at his jokes with exaggerated delight, her head thrown back to expose her throat. She complimented everything: the food, the wine, the house, but her words felt hollow, rehearsed. "Your mother is such an incredible cook," she said to Daniel, her hand resting possessively on his thigh. "I don't know how she does it." "Years of practice," I said mildly, noting how her other hand played with the stem of her wine glass, her fingers tracing patterns that seemed designed to draw Richard's attention. The most nauseating moment came during dessert. As I served the apple pie, Vanessa leaned across the table to reach for the cream pitcher, an unnecessary movement that gave Richard a clear view down her dress. "This pie is divine, Kate," Richard said, but he wasn't looking at the pie. "You've outdone yourself." "Thank you, Richard. It's my grandmother's recipe. I'm glad you're enjoying it." Daniel, bless him, noticed nothing. He was too busy talking about the sustainable building techniques he wanted to implement in his next project, his enthusiasm for his work making him oblivious to the silent conversation happening right in front of him. After dinner, Daniel and I cleared the dishes while Richard and Vanessa remained at the table. As I loaded the dishwasher, I could hear fragments of their conversation. "Can't keep doing this," Vanessa's voice, urgent and pleading. "Not much longer," Richard's reply, reassuring. "Suspects something. She doesn't know anything. Kate's too naive to notice. I continued loading dishes, humming softly to myself as if I didn't have a care in the world. In the reflection of the kitchen window, I could see them at the dining table, their heads close together, speaking in hushed tones. They were wrong. I knew everything. But I continued my performance, playing the role they expected. The oblivious wife, too old and too trusting to see what was happening right under her nose. After Daniel and Vanessa left, Richard retreated to his study again. I went upstairs to our bedroom and sat at my vanity, studying my reflection. 64 years old. 2 decades past my prime, according to society's cruel metrics. No wonder Richard had looked elsewhere. But then I thought about my grandmother, who'd lived to 93 and remained sharp as a tack until the end. She'd taught me that a woman's power doesn't come from her youth or her beauty. It comes from her mind, her patience, her ability to outlast her opponents. I opened the bottom drawer of my vanity, the one where I kept my jewelry and important papers. Tucked beneath a velvet box of pearls was a business card I'd been saving for years, given to me by a friend who'd gone through a difficult divorce. Patricia Sullivan, attorney at law specializing in complex divorce and asset protection. I picked up my phone and composed a text message. Ms. Sullivan, I'm Catherine Brennan. A friend recommended you several years ago for divorce proceedings. I believe I may need your services. Can we meet this week? Discretion is essential. The response came within minutes. Of course, Mrs. Brennan. I have an opening Tuesday at 2 p.m. My office is in Midtown Manhattan. I look forward to meeting you. I deleted both messages from my phone and put the business card back in its hiding place. Then I went to the bathroom, removed my makeup, and prepared for bed. When Richard finally came upstairs at midnight, smelling faintly of the perfume Vanessa had been wearing, I pretended to be asleep. He slipped into bed beside me, and I felt him relax, probably relieved that he wouldn't have to make awkward conversation or explain why he'd been in his study for 4 hours. In the darkness, I smiled. The game had begun. Patricia Sullivan's office occupied the 42nd floor of a gleaming glass tower in Midtown Manhattan. I'd taken the train into the city, telling Richard I was meeting an old friend for lunch and shopping. He'd barely looked up from his phone when I mentioned it. The reception area was understated but elegant. Soft gray walls, modern furniture, and a stunning view of the city skyline. A young receptionist greeted me with professional warmth. Mrs. Brennan, Ms. Sullivan is ready for you. Patricia Sullivan was not what I expected. I'd pictured someone older, perhaps stern and mannish. Instead, she was a woman in her late 40s with intelligent dark eyes, impeccably styled brown hair, and a navy suit that spoke of both success and good taste. When she shook my hand, her grip was firm and confident. Mrs. Brennan, please have a seat. Can I offer you coffee? Tea? Tea would be lovely, thank you. As she prepared Earl Grey from a small service cart in her office, I took in my surroundings. The walls were lined with law books and framed degrees, Yale undergrad, Harvard Law. Her desk was organized but not sterile, with a small photo of her with 2 teenage daughters and several files stacked neatly to one side. So, she said, settling into the chair across from me rather than behind her imposing desk, a gesture I appreciated. Tell me what brings you here. I'd rehearsed this moment in my mind 100 times, but actually saying the words out loud was harder than I'd anticipated. My husband of 42 years is having an affair with our daughter-in-law. They're planning to divorce me and take everything I own. Patricia didn't react with shock or pity. She simply nodded and pulled out a legal pad. Let's start with the basics. When did you discover the affair? 5 days ago. My daughter-in-law's sister told me. She'd witnessed them together. And have you confronted your husband? No, I'm pretending I don't know anything. Patricia's eyebrows rose slightly, the first real reaction she'd shown. That's actually very smart. Most people react emotionally and tip their hand too early. May I ask why you chose to wait? Because I want to understand exactly what I'm dealing with before I make any decisions, I said. This house, our assets, our family legacy, I need to know where I stand legally. Smart, Patricia said again, making notes. Let's start with the basics. How are your assets currently titled? For the next hour, we went through everything. The house, purchased 40 years ago with money from my family's estate. The investment accounts accumulated over decades of careful saving. The family business that Richard had inherited from his father. The vacation properties in Cape Cod and Vermont. And most importantly, the trust that had been established by my grandfather. I'd brought copies of everything, deeds, account statements, insurance policies, the original trust documents that I'd found in my father's safe deposit box after he died. I spread them across Patricia's conference table like playing cards. She studied them carefully, her expression growing more focused as she read. Finally, she looked up at me with something that might have been admiration. "Mrs. Brennan, do you know what you have here? My grandfather's trust? I inherited it when I turned 30, shortly before Richard and I married. It holds the house and several investment properties." "It's more than that," Patricia said, tapping a particular clause in the document. "Your grandfather was quite forward-thinking. This trust has some very specific provisions about inheritance and divorce." My pulse quickened. "What kind of provisions?" Patricia read directly from the document, her voice clear and precise. "In the event that a marriage is dissolved due to adultery proven by clear and convincing evidence, the innocent party retains all rights to trust properties, and the offending party forfeits any claim to assets derived from or connected to said trust." I sat very still, processing this information. "So if I can prove Richard's affair, you would retain not just the house, but several other properties and investments that are connected to the trust," Patricia finished. "Properties that your husband currently believes he has a stake in." "And he doesn't know about these provisions?" Patricia shook her head. "From what you've told me, it sounds like he's operating under the assumption that you'd be entitled to half of everything in a standard divorce proceeding. He has no idea about the trust's protections." For the first time in 5 days, I felt something like hope stir in my chest. "How do we prove the affair?" "We gather evidence. Photos, financial records, witness testimony. I work with several excellent private investigators who specialize in this kind of case." She paused. "But there's something else we need to discuss. You said they're planning to take everything you own. What makes you think that?" I told her about Vanessa's comments to Rachel, about their obvious planning, about the way they were already acting as if the divorce was a done deal. Patricia's expression grew grim. "Mrs. Brennan, I need to warn you about something. In my experience, when people are this confident, this calculated, they often have their own lawyer involved already. There's a good chance your husband will present you with divorce papers and a settlement agreement that's designed to pressure you into accepting terms quickly. What should I do if that happens? Sign nothing without consulting me first, but..." She paused, clearly thinking through a strategy. "If you want to maintain your advantage, you might consider doing exactly what they expect." "I don't understand." Patricia leaned forward, her eyes bright with the kind of strategic intelligence I was beginning to appreciate. "They think you're naive, unsuspecting. What if you continue to play that role? What if you let them think they're winning?" "You mean, pretend to be defeated?" "Exactly. Let them present their unfair settlement. React the way they expect, maybe some tears, some confusion, but ultimately compliance. Meanwhile, we build our case. We gather evidence, we document everything, and when the time is right," she smiled, "we show them exactly what happens when you underestimate Catherine Brennan." I left Patricia's office feeling lighter than I had in days. She'd given me something I hadn't realized I'd lost. Not just a legal strategy, but a sense of my own power. I wasn't just a victim of my husband's betrayal. I was a strategist, a player in this game, not just a pawn. On the train ride back to Connecticut, I watched the landscape blur past my window. Somewhere out there, Richard and Vanessa were probably together, celebrating their cleverness, planning their future in my family's house. They had no idea the game was just beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, I became someone I barely recognized, an actress playing the role of the defeated wife. But every performance had a purpose. Every gesture was calculated. It started small. One evening, as Richard and I sat in the living room, him on his laptop, me with a book, I let out a long, weary sigh. "You know," I said, as if the thought had just occurred to me, "Mrs. Peterson down the street got divorced last year." Richard's fingers froze over his keyboard. "Oh? Yes. She seems happier now. Lighter, somehow." I turned a page in my book, not looking at him. "She told me at the garden club meeting that being married for so long can feel like carrying a weight you didn't even realize was there until you set it down." Silence. I could feel his eyes on me, trying to gauge if this was leading somewhere. "She's joined a book club, started taking painting classes," I continued. "She says she's discovering who she is outside of being someone's wife. It's quite admirable, really." "Kate," Richard said slowly, Are you unhappy?" I looked up, meeting his eyes with what I hoped was an expression of mild surprise. "Unhappy? No. Not unhappy exactly, just thoughtful, I suppose. We've been married for 42 years, Richard. Sometimes I wonder who I might have been if I'd had the chance to just be Catherine, not Catherine Brennan, not Daniel's mother, not the construction company owner's wife. Just me. I could see the wheels turning in his head, hope and guilt warring on his face. I never thought you felt that way. Neither did I said softly. But lately I've been doing a lot of thinking. I returned to my book, leaving him to stew in that carefully planted seed. The next week, I accidentally left a book on the coffee table, Finding Yourself After 50, A Woman's Guide to Reinvention. I made sure Richard saw it, though I pretended not to notice his double take. A few days later, I suggested he take a weekend trip with his old college friends. You work so hard, dear. You should have some fun. His surprise was almost comical. For years, I'd complained about his golf weekends, his late nights at the office. Now I was encouraging him to spend time away? Are you sure? He asked, suspicious. Of course. I might visit my college roommate in Boston. We've been talking about getting together. I watched the relief flood his face. More time apart meant more time with Vanessa, more freedom to plan their future. He probably couldn't believe his luck. The final act of my performance came on a Wednesday evening in late November. Richard had been unusually quiet all day, distracted in a way that seemed different from his normal preoccupation. When dinner was finished and we'd retreated to the living room, he cleared his throat. Kate, we need to talk. I set down my teacup, my heart pounding but my hands steady. That sounds serious. It is. He stood pacing to the window, his back to me. I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About Mrs. Peterson, about finding yourself, about all these years together. Yes? And I think maybe you're right. Maybe we've both been going through the motions for too long. He turned to face me. Kate, I think we should consider divorce. This was it, the moment I'd been preparing for. I let my face register shock. Not too much, just enough. Richard, I don't know what to say. I know this is sudden, he said quickly, moving to sit beside me. His hand reached for mine, and I had to fight every instinct not to pull away. But I think it's what we both need. We've had a good run, but people change. We're different people than we were 42 years ago. I suppose that's true, I said quietly. We can make this amicable, he continued, warming to his topic now. Fair. We'll both get to start fresh, pursue the lives we want. I looked down at our joined hands, his tan and strong from weekend golf, mine paler and marked with age spots I covered with makeup for special occasions. 42 years, and this was how it ended. Not with a fight or a confrontation, but with lies wrapped in the language of mutual agreement. I paused as if struggling with the words. Do you have someone else? The guilt that flashed across his face was answer enough, but he covered it quickly. This isn't about anyone else, Kate. This is about us finally being honest about where we are. Liar. But I nodded, pulling my hand away to wipe at eyes that didn't actually have tears. I need some time to process this. Of course. Take all the time you need. He stood, clearly relieved that I wasn't fighting, wasn't crying, wasn't making this difficult. I've already spoken to Robert Hastings, my lawyer from the firm. He can help us work out the details fairly. Of course he had. He'd probably called Hastings the moment he decided to betray our marriage. That's fine, I said. Whatever you think is best. After Richard went upstairs, claiming fatigue, I sat alone in the living room. Through the window I could see our reflection, me on the couch, the empty space where Richard had been sitting. It looked like a painting, portrait of a marriage ending. I picked up my phone and texted Patricia. He asked for the divorce. The trap is set. Her response came immediately. Perfect. Now we wait for them to show their hand. I looked around the living room, at the furniture we'd chosen together, the art we'd collected, the photos of Daniel at various ages lining the mantel. This was my home, my life, my legacy, and I'd be damned if I was going to let them take it without a fight. But they wouldn't know I was fighting until it was too late. They'd see a sad, defeated woman gracefully accepting the end of her marriage. They'd see someone too old, too tired, too naive to understand what was being taken from her. They'd see exactly what I wanted them to see. And when the moment was right, when they'd revealed every card in their hand, when they thought they'd won, that's when I'd show them who Catherine Brennan really was. I stood, turned off the lights, and headed upstairs to bed. Tomorrow, I'd call Patricia and finalize our strategy. Tomorrow, I'd begin gathering the evidence that would ensure justice. But tonight, I'd lie next to my husband of 42 years one more time, knowing that every tender word, every loving gesture, every promise he'd ever made had been nothing but lies. Some people say that revenge is beneath a lady. My grandmother used to say that a lady never seeks revenge. She simply ensures that justice is served with impeccable manners and perfect timing. And I was about to give them a masterclass in both. 2 weeks after Richard's carefully rehearsed request for divorce, I found myself sitting in the reception area of Hastings & Partners, a law firm housed in a gleaming 45-story glass tower in downtown Hartford. The waiting room was designed to intimidate. All marble floors, mahogany panels, and abstract art that probably cost more than most people's cars. Richard sat across from me, checking his phone every few seconds. He'd been on edge all morning, snapping at me over breakfast when I'd asked if he wanted eggs or just toast. Now he paced near the floor-to-ceiling windows, pretending to admire the view of the city while his fingers flew across his phone screen. I knew who he was texting. The private investigator Patricia had hired, a retired detective named Walter Pierce, had been following Richard for the past 10 days. The photographs he'd delivered to Patricia's office told a sordid story. Richard and Vanessa at the Grandview Plaza Hotel, Suite 4012, $1,200 per night. Richard and Vanessa having lunch at an intimate French restaurant in West Hartford. Richard and Vanessa shopping together at an upscale jewelry store where he'd purchased a diamond bracelet for $8,500. All charged to the credit card connected to our joint account. He was buying gifts for his mistress with my money. The door to the inner office opened and Daniel appeared, looking confused and uncomfortable in his charcoal suit. Richard had insisted our son be here to support his mother during this difficult time. The irony was almost too much to bear. "Mom, are you okay?" Daniel asked, sitting beside me and taking my hand. "You don't have to do this. If Dad's being unfair, we can fight it." I patted his hand, this sweet boy who still believed in fairness and justice. "It's all right, sweetheart. Sometimes marriages just run their course." "Mr. and Mrs. Brennan?" A tall man in an expensive suit appeared in the doorway. "I'm Robert Hastings. Thank you for coming." Robert Hastings was exactly what I'd expected. Silver-haired, patrician features, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He'd been Richard's golf partner for 15 years, which meant this wasn't just a lawyer-client relationship. This was a friend helping a friend screw over his wife. We were led into a conference room dominated by a massive table surrounded by leather chairs. Through the windows, I could see the Hartford skyline, the city where I'd lived my entire adult life spread out below us like a game board. Hastings took his seat at the head of the table, spreading documents across the polished surface with practiced efficiency. Richard sat to his right. I took the chair directly across from them, with Daniel beside me, practically vibrating with protective energy. "Before we begin," Hastings said, his voice carrying the smooth authority of someone accustomed to controlling rooms full of people, "I want to ensure everyone understands that this is intended to be an amicable dissolution. Both parties have expressed a desire to handle this matter with dignity and fairness." I nodded graciously. "Of course, that's what we both want." Richard shot me a quick glance, probably surprised by my cooperative tone. He'd been expecting resistance, arguments, tears. Instead, I'd been nothing but reasonable since agreeing to the divorce, which had clearly unsettled him. "Good. Excellent," Hastings continued. "Now let's review the proposed settlement." He slid a thick folder across the table to me. "As you'll see, we've attempted to divide the marital assets equitably, taking into consideration the length of the marriage and both parties' contributions." I opened the folder and began reading, my expression neutral even as the words on the page made my blood boil with a cold, controlled fury. According to Hastings' proposal, I would receive the small 2-bedroom condo in Queens that we'd purchased as an investment property 15 years ago. Current value, approximately $650,000. $200,000 in cash from our joint savings. Monthly alimony of $4,000 for 10 years. My personal jewelry and clothing Richard would retain. The Connecticut estate, valued at $4.2 million. 3 luxury condominiums in Manhattan, combined value $12 million. Brennan Construction Company, valued at $25 million. Joint investment accounts totaling $8.5 million. 2 vacation homes in Cape Cod and Vermont, combined value $6 million. All vehicles except my 10-year-old sedan. This seems rather one-sided, I said mildly, not looking up from the documents. Hastings cleared his throat, leaning back in his chair with the confidence of a man who thought he held all the cards. I understand your concern, Mrs. Brennan, but we have to consider the reality of the situation. Your husband has been the primary breadwinner throughout the marriage. The business requires continuity of leadership, and frankly, at your age, managing multiple properties would be quite burdensome. At my age, as if 64 meant I was incompetent. Additionally, Hastings continued, warming to his theme, there are some complications regarding the Connecticut estate specifically. I looked up. What kind of complications? Well, he said, shuffling papers as if searching for something, it appears there may be some irregularities with the original deed and trust documentation. The property transfer from your family to the marital estate is unclear. Until those issues are resolved, it would be prudent to leave the property in Mr. Brennan's name to avoid any legal complications down the road. I almost laughed at the sheer audacity of it. They were trying to steal my family's house using fabricated legal complications. I could see Vanessa's hand in this. She'd probably been researching the property for months, looking for any angle to claim it. I see, I said quietly. And these irregularities, when do you expect them to be resolved? Hastings waved his hand dismissively. These things can take years to sort out. Generational property transfers, trust modifications. It's quite complex. Really, it's better for everyone if we keep things simple. Daniel couldn't contain himself any longer. This isn't simple. It's highway robbery. Mom, you can't agree to this. Richard leaned forward, his voice taking on the patient, condescending tone he'd perfected over decades of explaining business deals he thought were too complex for me to understand. Daniel, son, your mother won't have to worry about property taxes, maintenance, all those headaches. The condo will be perfect for her, much more manageable. She can decorate it however she wants. Start fresh. Manageable. Start fresh. As if I were a child who needed protecting from adult responsibilities. I looked around the table, taking in each face. Hastings, smug and satisfied with his clever manipulation of legal language. Richard trying to look sympathetic while barely containing his excitement at getting everything he wanted. And Daniel, my sweet boy, looking at his father with growing horror as he began to understand what was really happening. Well, I said, closing the folder with a soft snap, I suppose you've thought of everything. Hastings smiled, probably thinking he'd won. We've tried to be thorough, Mrs. Brennan. Of course, you're welcome to have your own attorney review the documents, but I think you'll find everything is quite standard for a case like this. A case like this, a devoted wife of 42 years being discarded so her husband could play house with their son's wife. That won't be necessary, I said, reaching for the pen Hastings offered. The room went silent. Even Richard looked surprised. Mom, wait, Daniel started. Are you sure, Mrs. Brennan? Hastings asked, unable to hide his satisfaction. You don't want time to think about it? I met his eyes steadily. I'm 64 years old, Mr. Hastings. I know my own mind. Where do I sign? Daniel stood up abruptly. No, Mom, this is insane. You're giving up everything. I turned to my son, this good man who still believed in fairness because I'd raised him to. Daniel, sweetheart, sometimes in life you have to know when to fight and when to accept reality. Your father and I have had a good run, but it's time for both of us to start new chapters. But please, son, don't make this harder than it already is. Daniel's face was a mask of anguish and confusion, but he sat down slowly, his hand gripping the armrest so hard his knuckles turned white. Hastings pointed to lines at the bottom of various pages. Signature here, and here, initial here. I signed my name with steady strokes, each letter precisely formed. Catherine Elizabeth Brennan. The same signature I'd used on our marriage certificate 42 years ago, back when I'd believed in forever. As I set down the pen, I looked directly at Richard. There, I hope this gives you everything you're looking for. Something flickered in his eyes then. Guilt, maybe, or a belated recognition of what he was destroying. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by the selfish satisfaction of a man who thought he'd gotten away with betraying his wife. Hastings gathered the signed documents with obvious pleasure. Excellent. I'll file these with the court tomorrow. The divorce should be finalized within 60 days. 60 days until Richard was free to marry his son's wife. 60 days until Vanessa thought she'd be living in my family home. 60 days until they discovered that some games have rules the players don't even know exist. After the meeting, Daniel insisted on walking me to my car. The moment we were alone in the parking garage, he exploded. "Mom, what the hell was that? You just gave away everything. The house, the money, that's your inheritance, your security." I unlocked my car but didn't get in. Instead, I turned to face my son, really looking at him. He'd inherited my eyes and his father's height, and right now those eyes were filled with tears of frustration and helplessness. "Daniel, I need you to trust me." "Trust you? Mom, you just signed away your entire life." "Did I?" I asked softly. He stared at me, confused. "What do you mean?" I glanced around the parking garage, making sure we were alone. "Sweetheart, do you remember what I taught you about chess when you were little?" "Chess? Mom, this isn't the time." "Humor me. What did I teach you about chess?" He frowned, clearly thinking this was some kind of emotional breakdown. You said that sometimes the best move is the one your opponent doesn't see coming, that sometimes you have to sacrifice a piece to win the game." "Exactly." I cupped his face with both hands. "I need you to trust that I know what I'm doing. Can you do that for me?" "But Mom, can you trust me?" He searched my face for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "Okay, I trust you." "Good. Now go home to your wife. And Daniel?" I dropped my hands. "Pay attention. Really pay attention to the people around you." I got into my car and drove away, leaving him standing in the parking garage looking thoroughly confused. In my rearview mirror, I watched him pull out his phone, probably calling Vanessa to tell her about the meeting. Good. Let her hear about my complete capitulation. Let her celebrate her victory. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Did you sign?" "Every page," I texted back. "Perfect. Now we wait for them to get comfortable. Overconfident people make mistakes." I smiled as I merged onto the highway heading back to Connecticut. Let them get comfortable. Let them plan their future together in my house. Let Vanessa start shopping for new furniture and planning renovations. Because in 60 days, when the divorce was supposed to be finalized and they tried to claim their prizes, they were going to discover that some property doesn't belong to husbands or wives. It belongs to bloodlines. And mine stretched back 4 generations. That evening, while I prepared dinner in my kitchen, the kitchen where I'd cooked thousands of meals, where I'd taught Daniel to make his grandmother's chocolate chip cookies, where I'd celebrated birthdays and holidays and ordinary Tuesdays, my son's life was falling apart. I didn't know it yet. But Walter Pierce, my private investigator, was parked across the street from Daniel and Vanessa's Tribeca penthouse, camera ready, documenting everything. According to the report he'd give me the next day, this is what happened. Daniel arrived home at 7:15 p.m. to find Vanessa in their living room, surrounded by shopping bags from high-end furniture stores. She was wearing a silk robe, champagne chilling in an ice bucket, looking like a cat who'd caught the canary. "Baby, how did it go?" she asked, bouncing up to kiss him. Daniel pulled away. "It was awful. Mom just gave up. She signed everything without even fighting." "Well, maybe she knows when she's beaten," Vanessa said, pouring 2 glasses of champagne. "Come on, let's celebrate your parents finally making a mature decision." "Celebrate?" Daniel stared at her. "My mother just lost everything, and you want to celebrate?" Vanessa's smile faltered slightly. "I just meant, they've both been unhappy for so long. Isn't it better that they're finally free?" "Free? Vanessa, my mother is 64 years old. She just signed away her financial security. She's getting $4,000 a month, plus that condo." Vanessa's voice took on an edge. "That's more than most people have." "It's nothing compared to what my father is keeping." "Well, maybe if she'd contributed more to the marriage." "Contributed?" Daniel's voice rose. "She raised me, managed that entire estate, hosted every business dinner and client event for Dad's company for 40 years. What the hell do you mean contributed?" Vanessa realized she'd made a mistake. She softened her approach, moving closer to Daniel, touching his arm. "You're right, baby. I'm sorry. I know you're upset. I just hate seeing you so stressed." She pressed against him. "Let me help you relax." "I need to call Mom," Daniel said, pulling out his phone. "Now? It's late. Let her rest." She shouldn't be alone right now. Vanessa's phone rang then, the special ringtone she'd set for Richard. Daniel watched her face change, saw the way her eyes lit up. "I should get this," she said. It's Rachel. She's been having some issues." "Rachel?" Since when do you talk to your sister? Since she's family, Vanessa snapped, then caught herself. I mean, we've been trying to reconnect. I'll just be a minute. She stepped onto their balcony, sliding the glass door closed behind her. But she didn't close it all the way, her first mistake. Daniel stood there, debating whether to call me, when he heard Vanessa's voice carrying through the gap in the door. We did it, baby. Daniel froze. I know. I can't believe she just rolled over like that. Vanessa laughed, a sound he'd never heard from her before, sharp and cruel. The whole estate, everything. You were right, she's completely clueless. Baby? She'd called someone baby, and it wasn't him. Daniel moved closer to the door, his heart pounding. 60 days, Vanessa continued. That's all we have to wait, and then we can… She laughed again. I already picked out new furniture for the master bedroom. That floral wallpaper Kate has is absolutely hideous. I'm thinking sleek, modern, maybe all white with gold accents. Kate. She'd called his mother Kate, not your mom or even Catherine. And she was talking about redecorating my house. Daniel doesn't suspect a thing, Vanessa said. He's too busy feeling sorry for his precious mommy. God, you should have seen him in the car, practically crying about how unfair it all is. She paused, listening. Yes, I know. After the divorce is final and we're married, then I'll divorce him. We agreed, remember? I need to make sure everything is secure first. Can't have him getting vindictive and trying to claim part of your assets. Daniel's entire world tilted on its axis. The floor beneath his feet felt unstable, the walls closing in. The woman he loved, the woman he'd married 3 years ago, had been planning this all along. What do you mean, when am I going to divorce him? Vanessa's voice took on a petulant tone. Richard, we talked about this. I need to make sure you're actually going to marry me before I dump Daniel. I'm not stupid. Richard. She was talking to his father. Daniel's hand shot out to grip the doorframe, his knees threatening to give out. I love you too, Vanessa purred. Can't wait to wake up in our house every morning. That view from the master bedroom is incredible. We should put a hot tub on the balcony. Oh, and I want to turn Kate's precious rose garden into a Zen meditation space. All those flowers are so old-fashioned. Something broke inside Daniel then. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. The image he'd had of his wife, of his marriage, of his entire life, shattered like a mirror hitting concrete. 1,000 pieces of reflection showing him nothing but lies. Vanessa came back inside, still glowing with satisfaction, and found Daniel standing in the middle of the living room, his face white as chalk. Baby, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Who was on the phone? His voice sounded strange to his own ears, flat and distant. I told you, Rachel. She's… Don't. Daniel held up his hand. Just don't. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. What's wrong with you? How long? He asked. How long what? How long have you been fucking my father? The color drained from Vanessa's face, but she recovered quickly. Too quickly. Evidence of practice in deception. Daniel, I don't know what you… I heard you, he said, his voice shaking now. On the balcony. I heard everything. For a moment they stared at each other. Then Vanessa's face changed. The mask of the loving wife fell away, replaced by something cold and calculating that Daniel had never seen before. Well, she said, setting down her champagne glass carefully. I guess we're done pretending then. Done pretending? Daniel's voice cracked. Vanessa, we've been married for 3 years, and it's been the longest con of my life, she said, moving to the bedroom. But hey, it worked, didn't it? Your stupid mother signed away everything. Daniel followed her, watching in disbelief as she pulled out a suitcase and started throwing clothes into it. You never loved me? Vanessa laughed, that same cruel sound he'd heard on the balcony. Love you? Daniel, you're a nice guy and everything, but you're boring. And worse, you're not as rich as I thought you'd be. Turns out all the money was in your mom's family, and your dad has access to it. So, she shrugged. I upgraded. Upgraded, Daniel repeated numbly. Don't look at me like that. You got 3 years with a woman way out of your league. You should be thanking me for the free sex. The casual cruelty of it, the complete lack of remorse, finally penetrated Daniel's shock and reached the anger underneath. Get out, he said quietly. Oh, I'm going. Trust me, I can't wait to get out of this mediocre apartment and into that beautiful estate. She zipped up the suitcase. You know what? I'm doing you a favor. Now you can find some boring girl who wants to talk about sustainable architecture and have boring missionary sex twice a month. Get out, Daniel shouted. Get out of my home. Gladly. Vanessa grabbed her purse and the suitcase. At the door, she turned back. Oh, and Daniel? Your mom knew. About the affair, I mean. Rachel told her weeks ago. So when you're crying to Mommy about mean old Vanessa, just remember, she's been lying to you too. She slammed the door behind her, leaving Daniel standing in the wreckage of his marriage, trying to process what she'd just said. I knew. I'd known for weeks, and I hadn't told him. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and did what he should have done hours ago. He called me. My phone rang at 10:47 p.m. I was in bed, reading, Richard already asleep beside me, or pretending to be. When I saw Daniel's name on the screen, my heart clenched. Daniel? Sweetheart, it's late. Are you okay? Mom! His voice was broken, raw with tears. Mom, I need to come over, now. Please. Of course, I'll put on tea. Drive carefully. Richard stirred. Who was that? Daniel. He's coming over. At this hour? What for? He didn't say. Richard's phone buzzed then, a text message that lit up his face in the darkness. I didn't need to see it to know who it was from. 20 minutes later, I heard Daniel's car in the driveway. I was already downstairs, the kettle heating, when he came through the door. One look at his face told me everything. He knew. Oh, sweetheart, I said, opening my arms. Daniel collapsed into them, this tall, accomplished man reduced to a sobbing child by the betrayal of everyone he'd trusted. I held him while he cried, stroking his hair the way I had when he was small and afraid of thunderstorms. When the storm of emotion finally passed, I led him to the kitchen table and poured chamomile tea into his favorite mug, the one with the cartoon architect on it that he'd gotten as a birthday gag gift years ago. Tell me, I said gently. And he did. He told me about overhearing Vanessa's phone call, about the confrontation, about the cruel things she'd said as she left. Every word was a knife to my heart, not for my own pain, but for his. And then she said... He stopped, looking at me with eyes full of hurt. She said you knew, that Rachel told you weeks ago, and you didn't tell me. Yes, I said simply. That's true. Why? The word was barely a whisper. Why didn't you warn me? I took his hands in mine. Because I needed to be sure. Because I needed evidence. And because... I took a deep breath. Because I knew that if I told you, you'd confront them immediately, and they'd find a way to twist it, to make me seem like the paranoid old woman trying to poison your marriage. I would have believed you. Would you have? Really? I asked gently. Before tonight, if I'd told you that your wife was having an affair with your father, would you have believed me without proof? Or would you have thought I was just bitter about the divorce? Daniel opened his mouth to protest, then closed it. We both knew the answer. I needed them to reveal themselves, I continued, and I needed to protect what matters. What matters more than me? His voice cracked. Nothing. You matter more than anything, Daniel. But protecting you meant protecting our family, our legacy, and yes, myself. Because if Vanessa and your father had succeeded in their plan, they wouldn't have stopped at taking the house. They would have isolated you, turned you against me, and eventually, I paused. Did you know that Vanessa took out a life insurance policy on me? Daniel's face went white. What? I retrieved the folder Patricia had prepared and pushed it across the table. $2 million. She forged my signature. The insurance company called to verify, which is how I found out. With shaking hands, Daniel opened the folder. Inside was the forged insurance application, along with other documents Patricia had compiled. The trail of Vanessa's past, the mysterious death of her Aunt Margaret, the 2 wealthy older men she'd dated who died unexpectedly. She's done this before, Daniel whispered, reading. Mom, she's killed people. We don't know that for certain, I said, though I suspected it was true. But Detective Morrison is investigating. Margaret Thompson's body has been exhumed. If they find what they expect to find... Poison, Daniel said, reading the report. Digitalis, the same thing we use in low doses for heart medication. But in high doses, he looked up at me, horror in his eyes. She was going to kill you. Maybe. Or maybe the policy was just insurance. A backup plan if she couldn't get what she wanted through the divorce. Daniel stood abruptly, pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. How are you so calm about this? How can you just sit there talking about murder and betrayal like it's a business transaction? Because falling apart won't help either of us, I said firmly. Because I spent 2 weeks crying into my pillow every night, and now I'm past that. Because I've been planning my response while they've been planning my destruction. He stopped pacing, staring at me. Planning your response? Mom, what did you do? I signed that settlement agreement today, I said. I let them think they won. But you didn't give away the house, Daniel said slowly, understanding dawning. The trust. You told me once about grandfather's trust, how it protected the property. Section 7B, I confirmed. In the event of divorce due to adultery, the innocent party retains all trust assets. Your father knows nothing about it. Neither does Vanessa. They think they're getting the Connecticut estate, the Manhattan properties, everything. But they're not. No. In 60 days, when the divorce is supposed to be finalized, they're going to discover that they get nothing. Your father will keep his company, which, by the way, has $3 million in debt he doesn't think I know about. He'll keep his car. That's about it. Daniel sat back down heavily. You've been playing them this whole time. Learning to play chess with them, I corrected. And I've been winning. For the first time since he'd arrived, Daniel smiled, a small, broken smile, but genuine. Grandfather would be proud. He always said you had the sharpest mind in the family. Your grandfather taught me that sometimes the best way to win is to let your opponent think they've already won. People get careless when they think the game is over. We sat in silence for a moment, drinking our tea. Then Daniel said, What happens now? Now you go home, pack Vanessa's remaining things, and have them delivered to wherever she's staying. I assume she went to your father's apartment? Probably. File for divorce immediately. I'll have Patricia recommend a good attorney for you, someone who specializes in fraud and deception in marriage. With the evidence we have, you'll get an annulment rather than a divorce. The marriage will be declared void, as if it never happened. As if it never happened, Daniel repeated. I wish it never had. Don't say that. If you hadn't married Vanessa, we might never have discovered what your father was capable of. Better to know now than to spend another 20 years living with a lie. Daniel nodded, but I could see the pain in his eyes. He'd loved her, or thought he had. That kind of betrayal doesn't heal quickly. There's one more thing, I said hesitantly. Rachel, Vanessa's sister. She's the one who warned me. She tried to stop Vanessa, tried to protect this family even though it meant betraying her own sister. I should thank her, Daniel said. You should, I agreed. But Daniel, I think maybe you should wait a while before getting too close to anyone new. You need time to heal. He looked at me with a wisdom beyond his years, aged by the night's revelations. Mom, I'm 37 years old. I know I need time. But when the time is right, Rachel is nothing like her sister. No, I agreed. She's not. It was nearly 2 a.m. when Daniel finally left, steadier than when he'd arrived, but still shattered. I stood at the door watching his taillights disappear down the driveway, then turned to find Richard standing in the hallway in his pajamas. What was that about? He asked. I looked at my husband, this man I'd slept beside for 42 years, raised a child with, built a life with, and felt nothing but cold contempt. Daniel discovered that Vanessa is having an affair, I said calmly. Richard's face went through a series of expressions: shock, fear, calculation. What? With who? He didn't say, but apparently she's been using him all along, planning to leave him once she secured her financial future. That's terrible, Richard said, but I could see the relief in his eyes. Daniel knew about the affair, but apparently didn't know who the affair was with. Yes, I agreed. Terrible what people are capable of when they want something badly enough, when they're willing to lie and cheat and destroy lives to get what they want. I looked him directly in the eyes. Don't you think? Richard swallowed hard. Yes, terrible. Go back to bed, Richard. We have a busy few weeks ahead of us. Divorce proceedings to finalize, futures to plan. I smiled. New lives to begin. He nodded and retreated upstairs, probably to text Vanessa that their secret was half exposed. I locked the front door and turned off the lights, standing for a moment in the dark house. Somewhere out there, Daniel was driving home to an empty apartment, his heart broken, but his eyes finally open. Somewhere out there, Vanessa and Richard were probably panicking, trying to figure out how much Daniel knew. And somewhere in Midtown Manhattan, Patricia Sullivan was probably still awake, compiling evidence, building our case, preparing for the revelation that was coming in 57 days. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, passing family photos that now seemed like relics from someone else's life. In the master bathroom, I washed my face and looked at my reflection, 64 years old, but my eyes sharp and clear and filled with purpose. Some games require patience, I told my reflection, repeating the words I'd said to Rachel weeks ago. And I've been patient for a very long time. But patience had its limits, and in 57 days, patience would give way to justice. 3 weeks before the 60-day mark, my life had become a carefully choreographed performance. Every morning, I woke up beside Richard and wished him a pleasant day. Every evening, I prepared dinner and made small talk about the weather and neighborhood gossip. Every night, I lay awake listening to him sleep, planning my next move. But beneath the surface of this domestic tranquility, a different kind of war was being waged. Walter Pierce, my private investigator, had become my secret weapon. A former NYPD detective with 30 years of experience, Walter had the face of someone's kindly grandfather and the instincts of a bloodhound. He'd been documenting Richard and Vanessa's affair with methodical precision. The evidence was damning. I sat in Patricia's office on a gray December afternoon, reviewing the latest batch of photographs spread across her conference table, like cards in a particularly sordid game of poker. Richard and Vanessa entering the Grandview Plaza Hotel, 17 documented visits over the past month. Richard and Vanessa at a jewelry store, where he'd purchased not just one diamond bracelet, but 3 separate pieces totaling $24,000. Richard and Vanessa at a real estate office in Tuscany, yes, Tuscany, where they'd apparently been looking at villas. Walter had managed to get photos through the office window of them reviewing property listings, laughing, making plans for a future they thought was assured. But the most damning evidence was financial. Patricia had subpoenaed our joint bank records and credit card statements. What we found was staggering in its audacity. "Look at this," Patricia said, pointing to a highlighted section. "March through November, 8 months. Richard has spent $186,000 from your joint accounts on Vanessa. Hotels, jewelry, clothes, restaurants. He even bought her a car, a Mercedes convertible, $73,000. He bought her a car with my money," I said, my voice flat. "Your family's money, technically. The joint account is funded primarily by dividends from the trust investments." Patricia looked up at me. "Kate, we could pursue criminal charges for this. Financial elder abuse, fraud." "No," I interrupted. "I don't want him in jail. I just want him out of my life with nothing." "Fair enough." Patricia pulled out another folder. "Now about Daniel. He's filed for annulment based on fraud. Vanessa's attorney is fighting it. But with the evidence we have, the affair, the forged insurance policy, it's just a matter of time." "How is my son doing?" Patricia's expression softened. She'd met Daniel twice now and had developed a protective fondness for him. "He's healing, slowly. And—" she hesitated. "He's been spending time with Rachel. I know. She's been good for him, patient, honest, everything her sister isn't." "There's something else you should know," Patricia said, pulling out a final folder. This one was marked with Detective Morrison's name. Margaret Thompson's autopsy results came back. I leaned forward, my heart pounding. Digitalis poisoning. Levels consistent with intentional overdose, not accidental. The DA is building a case against Vanessa for first-degree murder. The room seemed to contract around me. I'd suspected, of course, but knowing was different from suspecting. "There's more," Patricia continued. "Morrison investigated those 2 men Vanessa dated before Daniel. Robert Fitzgerald, age 68, died of a heart attack in 2019. Harold Weston, age 72, died of a stroke in 2020. Both deaths were ruled natural at the time, but Morrison is pushing to have the cases reopened." "She's a serial killer," I whispered. "Potentially. And Kate," Patricia's voice was gentle but firm, "that insurance policy on you? We need to take it seriously. Morrison has assigned an officer to watch your house. Plainclothes, unmarked car, just in case." The reality of my situation hit me then with the force of a physical blow. My husband wasn't just having an affair. He was involved with a woman who may have killed multiple people for money. A woman who had forged my signature on a life insurance policy worth $2 million. "Does Richard know?" I asked. "About Vanessa's past?" We don't think so. His phone records show increased communication with her over the past 6 months, but nothing that suggests he knows she's being investigated for murder. Then he's a fool as well as a traitor, I said bitterly. Or he will be soon, Patricia replied. Because in 3 weeks, when that divorce is supposed to be finalized, his whole world is going to come crashing down. Meanwhile, across town, Daniel was building his own case. He'd taken my advice and installed monitoring software on Vanessa's phone before she'd moved out. Legally questionable, perhaps, but effective. Every text message, every phone call, every search query was being logged and sent to his lawyer. What he discovered broke his heart all over again, but it also strengthened his resolve. Text from Vanessa to Richard, November 28th. Only 32 days left. Can't wait to wake up in that beautiful master bedroom every morning. First thing I'm doing is ripping out those hideous rose bushes Kate's so proud of. Richard's response? We should keep some of the garden. Daniel might visit eventually. Vanessa's reply? Who cares about Daniel? Once we're married, we don't need to pretend to care about him anymore. He's boring anyway. I faked every orgasm for 3 years, LOL. Daniel had shown me that exchange, his hands shaking as he held out his phone. I'd held him while he cried. Not for the loss of Vanessa, he insisted, but for the loss of who he'd thought she was. But Vanessa's texts revealed something more concerning than just cruelty. They revealed planning, calculation, and a chilling disregard for human life. Text from Vanessa to an unknown number, December 3rd. The old lady signed everything. R says she's too stupid to realize what she gave up. 25 days and it's all ours. Unknown number's response. And the other thing we discussed? Vanessa. Waiting for the right moment. After the divorce is final. Has to look natural. Can you still get the medication? Unknown number. Same as we used before. Untraceable if you're careful. Daniel had taken that exchange directly to Detective Morrison, who'd immediately traced the unknown number to a woman named Lisa Chen, a former pharmacy technician who'd been fired 2 years ago for stealing controlled substances. The net was closing around Vanessa, but she didn't know it yet. 1 week before the divorce was supposed to be finalized, Richard did something unexpected. He asked me to dinner. Just the two of us, he said one morning over coffee, to say goodbye properly, to celebrate what we had, even if we're ending it. I almost laughed at the audacity, but I maintained my mask of the gracious, defeated wife. That would be nice, Richard. He chose Le Bernardin, one of the most expensive restaurants in New York City, known for its seafood and its discretion. I dressed carefully for the occasion, a simple black dress that my grandmother had always said made me look elegant, her pearl necklace, my hair styled in a classic chignon. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a discarded wife. I saw a woman in control of her destiny. Richard was already seated when I arrived, looking uncomfortable in his suit and tie. The host led me to our table, private, tucked away in a corner where we could speak without being overheard. You look beautiful, Richard said, standing to pull out my chair. Thank you. We ordered wine, appetizers, entrees. We made small talk about the restaurant, the food, anything but what was really happening between us. Finally, over the main course, Richard set down his fork and looked at me directly for the first time in months. Kate, I need to say something. All right? I want to thank you for being such a wonderful wife for 42 years, for raising Daniel, for making our house a home. His voice was thick with emotion, genuine or performed, I couldn't tell anymore. I know this hasn't been easy for you. No, I agreed. It hasn't. Do you? He hesitated. Do you hate me? I considered the question carefully, taking a sip of wine to buy time. Did I hate him, or did I just hate what he'd become? I think, I said slowly, that hate requires energy I no longer have. I'm disappointed, Richard. Sad. Bewildered at how we got here. But hate? No. He looked relieved, which told me everything I needed to know. He wanted absolution, wanted to leave this marriage feeling like a good guy who'd simply grown apart from his wife, not a betrayer who'd destroyed 42 years for a younger woman. I wasn't going to give him that comfort. Richard, I know about Vanessa. His face went white. His wine glass stopped halfway to his lips. What? The affair, the hotels, the jewelry, the villa in Tuscany you've been planning to buy together. I kept my voice conversational, as if discussing the weather. I've known for quite some time. Kate, Let me finish. I set down my own glass with careful precision. I know you've been planning this divorce for months. I know Vanessa married our son specifically to get close to our family's money. I know she's been manipulating both of you, though I suspect you're too infatuated to see it. Richard's mouth opened and closed, no words emerging. I also know about the forged life insurance policy, the one Vanessa took out in my name, naming herself as beneficiary. Did you know about that, Richard? No, I swear I didn't know. I believe you. You're not that clever. I leaned back in my chair. But here's what I can't figure out. Did you know about Margaret Thompson? Who? Vanessa's aunt, who died very suddenly 2 years ago and left Vanessa $450,000, who was poisoned with Digitalis disguised as a heart attack. The color drained completely from Richard's face now. Poisoned? Kate, what are you talking about? Your girlfriend, your future wife, is being investigated for murder, Richard. Multiple murders, actually. And you've tied yourself to her so completely that when she goes down, you're going to fall right alongside her. I can't. Richard pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. You're making this up because you're angry. Am I? I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo, one of the many Walter Pierce had taken. Richard and Vanessa kissing outside the Grandview Plaza Hotel, the timestamp clear. November 15th, 2:47 p.m. Where did you get that? He whispered. I hired a private investigator. I have 47 photos just like this one. I have bank statements showing you've spent $186,000 on her in 8 months. I have text messages where she calls our son boring and stupid. I have proof of fraud, adultery, conspiracy. I put my phone away. And in 7 days, I'm going to use all of it. Richard slumped in his chair, looking suddenly old and tired. What do you want? I don't want anything from you, Richard. You've already given me everything I need. Evidence of your betrayal. Justification for invoking Section 7B of the Brennan Family Trust. Section what? I smiled then, coldly. You never read the trust documents, did you? You just assumed that because we'd been married for 4 decades, you had rights to my family's property. Kate, please. Section 7B states that in the event of divorce caused by adultery, the innocent party retains all trust assets. The house, the Manhattan condos, the investments, all of it stays with me. You get nothing. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Nothing? Well, not nothing. You'll keep your company, and its $3 million in debt. You'll keep your car, your clothes, whatever assets you accumulated before our marriage. I stood up, gathering my purse. But my family's legacy, the home we raised our son in, the security you thought you'd retire in comfort with, that all stays with me. You can't do this. I already have. The papers were filed this morning. I looked down at him, this man I'd once loved, now reduced to a desperate stranger. The question now is, what will you do? Richard looked up at me, panic and anger warring on his face. I'll fight this. I'll get my own lawyers. With what money? I've already frozen our joint accounts pending the divorce settlement. And Robert Hastings? I smiled. Patricia filed a complaint with the state bar about his conduct in our case. He's too busy trying to save his own license to help you. I started to walk away, then turned back. Oh, and Richard, you should probably warn Vanessa that Detective Morrison is planning to arrest her tomorrow morning. Murder charges, multiple counts. Kate, please. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll leave Vanessa. I'll come back. We can fix this. No, we can't. And I don't want to. I looked at him one final time. I want you to remember this moment, Richard. Remember that you had everything. A devoted wife, a wonderful son, a beautiful life, and you threw it all away for a woman who was planning to murder me for insurance money. Remember that when you're alone. I left him sitting at the table, his face buried in his hands. The maitre d' gave me a knowing look as I passed. He'd probably seen this scene played out dozens of times in this elegant restaurant. Outside, the December air was cold and crisp. I breathed it in, feeling lighter than I had in months. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. How did it go? He knows everything now, I typed back, and he's terrified. Good. See you in court in 7 days. I got into the car service I'd arranged and gave the driver my address. As we pulled away from the restaurant, I caught a glimpse of Richard through the window, still sitting at our table, alone. 42 years of marriage, ending not with love or even hatred, but with cold, calculated justice. My grandmother would have approved. The morning of December 15th dawned gray and cold, with snow threatening in the heavy clouds. Exactly 60 days since I'd signed those divorce papers in Robert Hastings' office. Exactly 60 days since Richard and Vanessa thought they'd won. I was having coffee on my back porch, on my property, in my home, when Richard's call came through. I let it ring 3 times before answering. "Hello, Richard." "What the hell have you done?" His voice was raw with panic and rage, all pretense of civility abandoned. I took a leisurely sip of my coffee before responding. "Good morning to you, too. I'm fine, thank you for asking. The weather is lovely today, don't you think?" "Don't play games with me, Kate. My lawyer called an hour ago. He says there's a problem with the house, something about a trust that nobody mentioned before." "Oh, that." I kept my voice light, conversational. "Yes, I imagine that came as quite a surprise." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up. Then his voice came back, lower and more dangerous than before. You knew about this trust the whole time, didn't you?" "Of course I knew, Richard. It's my family's trust. My grandfather established it to protect our property from exactly this kind of situation." "This kind of situation?" His voice cracked with indignation. "We're getting divorced. That's normal. People get divorced every day." I stood up and walked to the edge of the porch, looking out over the garden that my grandmother had planted, that my mother had tended, that I had lovingly maintained for 40 years. "You're right. People do get divorced every day, but they usually don't commit adultery with their daughter-in-law while planning to steal their wife's family home. That's not quite so normal, is it?" The sharp intake of breath told me he hadn't expected such direct confrontation. For weeks I'd played the confused, hurt wife. Now he was hearing from the woman who'd been planning his downfall while he celebrated his cleverness. "How long have you known?" he asked finally. "About me and Vanessa?" "Long enough. Long enough to document everything. Long enough to protect what matters. Long enough to watch you and that sociopath plan your little future together in my family's house." "Our house," he corrected automatically, but there was no conviction in his voice anymore. "No, Richard, never our house. The deed has always been in trust. You were allowed to live here as my husband, but you never owned so much as a single brick. And now that you've chosen to end our marriage through adultery, proven adultery, documented with 47 photographs and 8 months of financial records, you've forfeited any right to remain here." Another long silence. Then, in a voice that sounded like a man watching his world collapse, "Where am I supposed to go?" The pathetic quality of the question almost made me feel sorry for him. Almost. "I imagine you and Vanessa will figure something out. You're both so clever, after all." "Kate, please." The desperation in his voice was palpable. "Can't we work something out? I know I made mistakes, but—" "Mistakes?" I cut him off, my voice sharp for the first time. "Mistakes are forgetting to pick up milk or missing an anniversary. What you did was a deliberate betrayal of everything we built together. What you did was seduce our son's wife and plan to steal my inheritance. Those aren't mistakes, Richard. That's who you chose to become." I heard a woman's voice in the background, shrill and demanding. Vanessa, no doubt, wanting to know what was happening to her carefully laid plans. "I have to go," Richard said, his voice defeated. "Yes, you do. Oh, and Richard, you should turn on the news, Channel 8. I think you'll find it interesting." I hung up before he could respond. Exactly 3 minutes later, my phone lit up with a news alert. "Breaking. Connecticut woman arrested in connection with multiple deaths. Vanessa Clark Brennan, 29, charged with first-degree murder in death of Margaret Thompson. Police investigating connection to other suspicious deaths." There was a photo, Vanessa in handcuffs, being led out of what looked like Richard's downtown apartment, her perfect hair disheveled, her makeup smeared with tears, screaming at the cameras. My phone rang again. Daniel this time. "Mom, are you watching the news?" "Yes, sweetheart." "They arrested her. They actually arrested her." His voice was filled with a mixture of relief and horror. "Mom, I was married to a murderer." "I know, baby, but you're safe now. She can't hurt you anymore. Detective Morrison just called me. They found digitalis in Margaret Thompson's body, and they're exhuming Robert Fitzgerald and Harold Weston. They think she killed them, too." "I know. And the insurance policy on you. Mom, she really was planning to kill you." "Yes? How are you so calm?" He sounded close to tears. Because I'm safe. You're safe. And justice is being served. That's all I can ask for. We talked for a few more minutes, and then Daniel said, Rachel's here. She wants to know if she can come see you later. She feels responsible. Tell her to come for dinner, both of you. We have a lot to talk about, and I'd rather do it over a good meal than over the phone. After I hung up, I sat back down on my porch and finished my coffee. The sky was lighter now, the threatened snow holding off. In the distance, I could hear my neighbors' children playing, their laughter carrying on the cold air. My phone buzzed with texts. From Patricia. Did you see the news? We did it, Kate. We actually did it. From Daniel. I love you, Mom. I'm so sorry I didn't see what was happening sooner. From Rachel. Thank you for believing me. Thank you for having the courage to fight back. And surprisingly, one from Richard. I never knew about the murders. I swear. I'm sorry, Kate. For everything. I didn't respond to that one. There was nothing left to say to Richard. 2 weeks later, I sat in a courtroom listening to the evidence against Vanessa Clark Brennan. The prosecutor was a sharp woman in her 50s named Jennifer Walsh. She laid out the case with methodical precision. Margaret Thompson, deceased at age 58. Cause of death, digitalis poisoning disguised as heart failure. Beneficiary of life insurance, Vanessa Clark Brennan. Amount, $450,000. Robert Fitzgerald, deceased at age 68. Exhumed body showed traces of digitalis. Vanessa had been his companion for 6 months before his death. Amount inherited through his will, $280,000. Harold Weston, deceased at age 72. Exhumed body showed traces of the same poison. Vanessa had dated him for 4 months. Amount inherited, $195,000. And then there was me, the one who got away. The forged life insurance policy. The Google searches on Vanessa's computer. How long does digitalis stay in blood? Undetectable poisons for elderly people. Life insurance payout timeline after death. Text messages to Lisa Chen, the former pharmacy technician, arranging to purchase controlled substances. The courtroom was silent as the evidence mounted. Vanessa sat at the defense table, her expensive lawyer whispering urgently in her ear, but even he looked like he knew this was a losing battle. When they showed the text messages between Vanessa and Richard, the cruel comments about Daniel, the plans to get rid of the old lady, the callous discussions of my money, I heard Daniel, sitting beside me, make a small sound of pain. Rachel, on his other side, took his hand. Richard was in the courtroom too, sitting in the back row, looking smaller and older than I'd ever seen him. When our eyes met across the room, he looked away quickly, shame written across his face. The bail hearing was brief. Given the flight risk, Vanessa had been researching property in Italy with Richard, and she had access to funds, and the severity of the charges, bail was denied. Vanessa would await trial in custody. As they led her away, she turned and looked directly at me. For a moment, I saw pure hatred in her eyes. The mask finally dropped completely, revealing the monster underneath. "This isn't over," she mouthed. But it was, and we both knew it. Outside the courthouse, Detective Morrison pulled me aside. "Mrs. Brennan, I wanted you to know, we found something else during our investigation." "Oh?" "Richard Brennan's financial records. He had no idea how deeply in debt the company was, but Vanessa did. She'd been researching it for months before she approached him. She knew he was desperate," I said, as he said, understanding. "Exactly. The company was hemorrhaging money. Richard was looking at bankruptcy, possibly criminal charges for some shady business deals. And then along comes this beautiful young woman who makes him feel alive again, who promises him a fresh start. She targeted him as much as she targeted me." "Yes, which doesn't excuse what he did," Morrison added quickly. "But it does explain it. He was desperate, vulnerable, and she knew exactly which buttons to push." I thought about that as I walked to my car. Richard, who I'd thought was simply a cruel betrayer, had also been a victim in his own way. Manipulated, used, set up to fail. It didn't change what he'd done to our marriage, to our son, to our family. But it added a layer of complexity to a situation I'd thought I understood completely. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen on Thanksgiving morning, preparing dinner for a house full of people I loved. The kitchen smelled like it had for every Thanksgiving I could remember: roasting turkey, sage and onion stuffing, pumpkin pie cooling on the counter. But everything else was different. Daniel and Rachel were in the dining room, setting the table and laughing about something I couldn't quite hear. They'd been dating officially for 3 months, taking things slowly, carefully, building something real on a foundation of honesty. Patricia and her husband were in the living room, chatting with my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, and her daughter. I'd invited several women from the Fresh Start Fund, the foundation I'd established with the settlement money Richard had been forced to pay me. Women who'd been betrayed, abandoned, left vulnerable. Women I was helping to rebuild their lives. Detective Morrison had stopped by earlier to drop off a pie his wife had made and to give me an update. Vanessa's trial was set for February. The prosecution was confident. She would likely spend the rest of her life in prison. Richard was living in a small apartment in Hartford, working as a consultant for his former company, which had been sold to pay his debts. Daniel had met with him once at Richard's request. The conversation had been painful but necessary. Forgiveness would take time, might never come completely, but Daniel was trying to understand rather than simply condemn. I hadn't seen Richard since the courthouse. He'd sent a letter a few months ago, pages and pages of apologies, explanations, self-recrimination. I'd read it once and filed it away. Maybe someday I'd read it again. Maybe not. The doorbell rang and I wiped my hands on my apron, heading to answer it. Rachel stood on my front steps, holding a beautiful flower arrangement, not roses from the garden that Vanessa had wanted to destroy, but chrysanthemums and asters in fall colors. "For you," she said, smiling, "to say thank you for everything." "You don't need to thank me, dear. You saved my life. And you saved mine. You showed me that doing the right thing, even when it's hard, even when it costs you everything, is worth it." I pulled her into a hug, this woman who'd had the courage to betray her own sister to save strangers. "You're family now," I whispered. "You know that, right?" "I hope so," she whispered back. Daniel appeared in this hallway, and the smile that lit up his face when he saw Rachel made my heart soar. This is what love should look like. Open, honest, joyful. "Dinner in 30 minutes, I announced. "Daniel, can you open the wine? Rachel, would you help me with the gravy?" As we worked together in the kitchen, I looked around at the home I'd fought so hard to keep. The home that 4 generations of my family had lived in. The home that Vanessa had tried to steal, that Richard had tried to give away. It was mine. Truly, completely mine. But more than that, it was full again. Full of laughter and conversation and people who genuinely cared for each other. During dinner, Patricia raised her glass. "I'd like to make a toast to Catherine Brennan, the strongest woman I know. You taught us all that grace under pressure isn't just a saying. It's a way of life." "To Kate," everyone echoed, raising their glasses. Daniel stood next, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "To Mom, who taught me that true strength isn't about never being hurt. It's about what you do after the hurt. How you rise, how you fight back, how you protect the people you love." "To new beginnings," Rachel added softly. "And to families we choose as much as families we're born into," Mrs. Henderson said, smiling at the women from the Fresh Start Fund. I raised my own glass, looking around the table at these faces, some old, some new, all beloved. "To survival," I said. "To justice, and to the knowledge that at any age, at any stage of life, it's never too late to discover who you really are when everything false is stripped away." We drank, and then the conversation flowed naturally. Stories and laughter and the easy comfort of people who'd been through darkness together and come out into the light. Later, after everyone had gone home and the dishes were washed and put away, I stood alone in my living room. The house was quiet now, but it was a peaceful quiet, not the oppressive silence of secrets and lies. I opened my jewelry box and pulled out my original wedding ring, the simple gold band Richard had placed on my finger 42 years ago. The inscription inside read, "Forever and always." Forever had lasted 42 years. Always had ended the day he chose another woman over his family. But that didn't erase the good years. The love that had been real, even if it hadn't been permanent. The son we'd raised together. The life we'd built. I placed the ring in a small velvet bag and tucked it away in the back of the jewelry box. Not thrown away. That felt wrong somehow. But put away. A relic of who I used to be. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Thank you for the best Thanksgiving ever. Rachel and I are so grateful to have you in our lives." I typed back, Thank you for becoming the man I always knew you could be. Sleep well, sweetheart. A moment later, another text. Mom, I'm going to ask Rachel to marry me. At Christmas. I wanted you to know first. My eyes filled with tears, happy tears this time. She'll say yes, and I couldn't be happier for you both. Will you help me pick out a ring? I want something that will last, something real. Of course, we'll go together. I walked through the house one more time, turning off lights, checking locks, the same ritual I'd performed for 40 years. But now it felt different, peaceful rather than routine, secure rather than automatic. In the mirror by the front door, I caught my reflection. 64 years old, silver hair, laugh lines, age spots on my hands. But my eyes were clear and bright, alive. I thought about the young Catherine who'd married Richard at 22, full of dreams and trust and naive faith in happy endings. I thought about the middle-aged Catherine who'd spent decades keeping the peace, smoothing over problems, making herself smaller to make others comfortable. And I thought about who I was now, Catherine Brennan, keeper of her family's legacy, protector of what mattered, survivor of betrayal, and architect of her own future. My phone rang one last time. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Kate? Richard's voice, tentative and broken. I know I have no right to call, but I wanted to say Happy Thanksgiving. And to tell you, I'm getting help. Therapy. Trying to figure out how I became the kind of man who could do what I did. That's good, Richard. I hope you find what you're looking for. I don't expect forgiveness. Good, because I can't give it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I know. I just wanted you to know that I see now what I had. What I destroyed. And Kate? His voice broke. You were right. About everything. And I'll spend the rest of my life regretting that I didn't see it sooner. Goodbye, Richard. Goodbye, Kate. I hung up and stood there in the dark hallway for a moment, the phone warm in my hand. Then I turned off the last light and headed upstairs to bed. Tomorrow was a new day. Tomorrow I'd help Daniel pick out an engagement ring for Rachel. Tomorrow I'd meet with the architect about expanding the Fresh Start house to accommodate more women. Tomorrow I'd have lunch with Patricia and plan the next phase of our work together. Tomorrow was full of possibilities. But tonight, I would simply be grateful. For survival, for justice, for the knowledge that I had faced the worst betrayal of my life and emerged not just intact, but stronger. Outside my window, snow had begun to fall, covering the garden in pristine white. By morning, everything would look new again, transformed by the silent accumulation of something pure and clean. I smiled in the darkness. Some people say that revenge is beneath a lady, but my grandmother taught me that a lady doesn't seek revenge. She simply ensures that justice is served with impeccable manners and perfect timing, and I had given them all a masterclass in both. 1 year later, the May sunshine was warm on my face as I stood in my garden, watching the preparations for Daniel and Rachel's wedding. White chairs arranged in rows, an arch woven with roses from the bushes that Vanessa had wanted to destroy, a string quartet tuning their instruments. Daniel appeared beside me in his tuxedo, looking nervous and excited and so very happy. Ready, Mom? Ready for what, sweetheart? To walk Rachel down the aisle. Her father can't be here, and she asked, she wants you to do it. My eyes filled with tears. I would be honored. An hour later, I stood at the back of the garden with Rachel on my arm. She was radiant in a simple ivory dress, holding a bouquet of lavender, my grandmother's favorite flower. Thank you, she whispered, for giving me a second chance at family, for showing me what real strength looks like. Thank you for having the courage to tell the truth when it mattered most. You saved more than just my life, Rachel. You saved my son's soul. The music started. We began our walk down the aisle. Daniel stood under the rose arch, tears streaming down his face as he watched Rachel approach. The love between them was palpable, real, built on honesty and trust and genuine respect. As I placed Rachel's hand in Daniel's, I caught a glimpse of movement at the back of the garden. Richard stood there, just at the edge of the property line, watching from a distance. Daniel had invited him but asked him not to come to the ceremony itself. Maybe the reception, Dad. We'll see. Our eyes met across the garden. He looked older, sadder, but also somehow more real than he had in years. He nodded once. Acknowledgement, respect, perhaps the beginning of understanding. I nodded back. Not forgiveness, not yet, but acknowledgement that we'd all survived, that we were all still here, still trying to be better than we'd been. Then I turned my attention back to where it belonged, to my son and his bride, promising to love each other through whatever life brought them, promising honesty and loyalty and all the things that Richard and I had lost. The officiant began to speak, but I found myself thinking about my grandmother, about my mother, about all the strong women who'd come before me and lived in this house and tended this garden and protected this legacy. They'd taught me that strength isn't about never being broken. It's about what you build from the pieces. And I'd built something beautiful. As Daniel and Rachel exchanged their vows, I looked around at the garden full of people. Patricia and her family, Detective Morrison and his wife, the women from Fresh Start, neighbors and friends both old and new. This was my family now, chosen and born, blood and bond, united not by obligation, but by genuine love. The officiant pronounced Daniel and Rachel husband and wife, and they kissed to thunderous applause. And in that moment, standing in the garden my grandmother planted, in the home my family built, surrounded by people I loved and who loved me back, I realized something profound. Vanessa had tried to take everything from me. Richard had helped her, but they'd failed. Because the things that truly mattered, love, integrity, family, self-respect, those things couldn't be stolen or signed away or destroyed by betrayal. Those things I'd kept, and those things I'd pass on to the next generation. Daniel and Rachel walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, and Rachel reached out to squeeze my hand as they passed. "Thank you, Mom," she whispered. Mom. She'd called me Mom. I smiled through happy tears and watched them walk into their future, a future built on truth, on real love, on the lessons learned from watching betrayal and choosing to be better. And I knew with absolute certainty that I had won, not by destroying my enemies, though justice had been served, not by taking revenge, though consequences had been delivered, but by surviving with my soul intact, by protecting what mattered, by turning pain into purpose and betrayal into strength. At 65 years old, I'd learned who I really was when everything false was stripped away, and I'd never felt more powerful in my life. Thank you for following Catherine's journey. Comment below. What would you have done in her situation? Have you ever had to find strength you didn't know you had? Share your city and your story. I read every comment. If you enjoyed this story, there are 2 more on my channel that you might love. I'll leave them on screen now. Thank you for watching until the end. You're part of Catherine's victory too.